November 24, 1942. 0800 hours. Stalingrad, Soviet Union. Temperature, minus 18 degrees Celsius.
Lieutenant Wilhelm Hoffmann, 28 years old, operations officer with the 267th Infantry Regiment, 6th Army, sits in a frozen bunker reading a telegram that has just arrived from Hitler's headquarters, 1,500 miles away.
The message is brief, absolute, and catastrophic. 6th Army will hold present positions despite threat of temporary encirclement. Further orders to follow. Signed, Adolf Hitler. Hoffmann writes in his diary, "We are surrounded.
500,000 Soviet troops have closed the ring around us. Every officer knows what we must do: break out immediately while we still have fuel and ammunition. But this telegram forbids it. The Führer orders us to stand and fight where we are.
He promises relief and resupply by air. But we are 300,000 men.
We need 700 tons of supplies per day.
How can aircraft deliver that through Russian winter and Soviet fighters?"
He closes his diary.
Around him, Stalingrad burns.
Ahead lies a winter that will destroy an entire German army, not because they were defeated in battle, but because a single telegram ordered them to stand still and die.
This is the story of how Hitler's order trapped 300,000 soldiers in history's most infamous siege.
To understand how 300,000 men became trapped in Stalingrad, we need to go back 4 months.
July 1942.
After the failure to capture Moscow the previous winter, Hitler launches a new offensive, Case Blue, aimed at capturing the Caucasus oil fields that fuel the Soviet war machine. The plan calls for a two-pronged advance: one army group toward the oil fields, another to secure the northern flank along the Volga River.
The city that guards that flank is Stalingrad.
General Friedrich Paulus, 52 years old, commands the 6th Army, Germany's premier fighting force. He's a staff officer by training, meticulous and obedient, never a field commander before this campaign. The 6th Army numbers 270,000 men, supported by Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian allies.
In August, they reach Stalingrad's outskirts.
What should be a quick capture becomes a nightmare.
Soviet defenders, commanded by General Vasily Chukov, turn the city into a fortress. Every building becomes a strongpoint. Every street is contested.
By November, after 3 months of the most brutal urban combat in military history, German forces control 90% of Stalingrad's ruins.
But they bled themselves white doing it.
Units are at 50% strength.
Ammunition is low. The men are exhausted.
And the strategic situation has become dangerous. The 6th Army's flanks are held by Romanian and Italian armies, less well-equipped, less experienced.
Soviet intelligence has identified these as weak points.
And behind Soviet lines, 2 entire army groups are secretly assembling for the largest counteroffensive operation of the war, Operation Uranus.
Lieutenant Hoffmann arrived at Stalingrad in September 1942.
Before the war, he was a schoolteacher in Bavaria, married with 2 young children. He was drafted in 1940, fought in France, then sent east for Operation Barbarossa. His letters home through summer 1942 are optimistic.
August 12, we are advancing rapidly. The Russians cannot stop us. Perhaps this war will end before winter.
September 3, we've reached a great city on the Volga, Stalingrad.
From the hills we can see the entire city laid out below.
It should fall within days. But September becomes October, October becomes November, and the city doesn't fall. His letters change tone. October 15th, this is not war as we knew it in France. Every building must be taken room by room. We advance a street in the morning, lose it by evening. My company started with 180 men. We have 67 left. November 10th, the cold has begun. We have no winter clothing. The Ivans fight like devils, they won't surrender even when surrounded. Yesterday we found Soviet soldiers in a basement who had been cut off for a week. They were still fighting. What Hoffman and his comrades don't know is that while they grind forward meter by meter through Stalingrad's ruins, behind Soviet lines, an enormous trap is closing. Marshal Georgy Zhukov has concentrated over 1 million men, 13,500 heavy guns, 900 tanks, and 1,400 aircraft north and south of Stalingrad. His plan: smash through the weak Romanian flanks, encircle the entire 6th Army, and destroy it. The attack will begin in 9 days. November 19, 1942. 0730 hours. The Soviet trap springs. North of Stalingrad, 3,500 Soviet guns open fire simultaneously on Romanian positions. It's the heaviest artillery barrage of the war, shells falling so densely that entire defensive positions simply cease to exist. Within hours, Romanian lines collapse. Soviet tank armies pour through the gaps. The same day, south of Stalingrad, a second massive Soviet assault smashes through Italian and Romanian defenses. The two Soviet spearheads, Operation Uranus, are driving toward each other. The objective, Kalak on the Don, a town with critical bridges 60 miles west of Stalingrad. If Soviet forces meet there, the entire 6th Army will be encircled. At 6th Army headquarters in Stalingrad, General Paulus receives fragmentary reports throughout November 19 and 20, Romanian units in full retreat. Soviet tanks advancing. Communications lost. By November 21, the situation is clear: his army is being surrounded. Paulus immediately radios Army Group B headquarters requesting permission to withdraw westward, to break out of the closing pocket before it fully forms. Army Group B commander, General Maximilian von Wakes, agrees breakout is essential. But the decision must come from Hitler. On November 22, at 1630 hours, Soviet tank units from north and south meet at Kalak. The ring closes. 290,000 German and Axis troops are now trapped in a pocket 30 miles wide and 25 miles deep. Inside the pocket, the entire 6th Army, parts of the 4th Panzer Army, and various Romanian, Croatian, and support units. They have perhaps 3 weeks of ammunition at current consumption rates, and maybe 10 days of food on half rations. Every military professional knows what must happen immediately: break out to the west while Soviet forces are still disorganized from their offensive, before they can establish strong blocking positions. November 22 and 23 are the critical decision days. Inside the pocket, General Paulus and his corps commanders meet to discuss options. They're unanimous: immediate breakout is essential. They have fuel for about 20 miles of movement, enough to break through Soviet lines to the west and link up with relief forces. But it must happen now. Every day of delay allows Soviet forces to strengthen the ring. General Arthur Schmidt, Paulus's chief of staff, drafts the breakout plan: concentrate all armor at the weakest point of Soviet encirclement, break through, abandon heavy equipment that would slow movement, march west. Casualties would be heavy, equipment losses severe,
but the army would survive. Paulus sends the plan to Army Group headquarters with urgent request for authorization.
But Hitler is at the Berghof, his mountain retreat in Bavaria.
The telegram reaches him late on November 22. His initial reaction, according to witnesses, is rage.
He accuses his generals of defeatism.
The Sixth Army will hold Stalingrad, he declares. There will be no retreat.
His staff tries to explain the reality: 300,000 men surrounded, limited supplies, the pocket is not defensible long term. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of Wehrmacht High Command, attempts to persuade Hitler that breakout is the only option.
Hitler refuses to hear it.
Then Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, makes a catastrophic promise. Mein Führer, I can supply the Sixth Army by air.
The Luftwaffe will deliver everything they need. Hitler seizes on this.
If aerial resupply is possible, then the Sixth Army can hold indefinitely. Eventually, German forces outside the pocket will break through and relieve them.
On November 24, the telegram arrives at Paulus's headquarters, the order that will doom his army. The telegram reads, Sixth Army will hold positions between Volga and Don despite threat of temporary encirclement. Further orders regarding formation of fortified area will follow.
Supplies will be delivered by air.
Signed, Adolf Hitler. Paulus reads it in silence.
His staff officers are stunned.
General Hans Valentin Hube, commanding 14th Panzer Corps, is the first to speak. This is impossible.
We need 700 tons of supplies daily: food, ammunition, fuel, medicine. No air force in the world can deliver that through Russian winter and Soviet fighters. General Walter von Seydlitz-Schurzbach, commanding 51st Corps, is more blunt: this order will destroy us. We must disobey it and break out while we still can. But Paulus is a Prussian officer of the old school. He has never disobeyed an order in his career. These are the Führer's direct commands, he says quietly. We will comply. Some officers argue for breaking out regardless of Hitler's order, accepting court-martial later rather than certain death now. But Paulus refuses. Later that day, he issues orders to his divisions: establish defensive positions, conserve ammunition, prepare for extended operations supplied by air. The Stalingrad pocket, which historians will call the Kessel, the cauldron, is now permanent. For Lieutenant Hoffmann, the order arrives as company commanders gather their men to explain the situation. He writes in his diary, November 24, "We are told the Luftwaffe will supply us by air until relief arrives." The men don't believe it. We've seen the Soviet fighters. We know the distances. But orders are orders. We dig in and wait. What none of them know yet is that Göring's promise is based on fantasy, not logistics. The mathematics of aerial resupply are simple and devastating. The Sixth Army requires minimum 700 tons of supplies daily to maintain defensive operations, 400 tons of food, 300,000 men need rations, 250 tons of ammunition, 50 tons of fuel and medical supplies. The Luftwaffe's primary transport aircraft is the Ju-52 Triumph. Each plane can carry approximately 2.5 tons of cargo. Therefore, 280 sorties per day are required every single day just to meet minimum needs. The Luftwaffe Transport Command has perhaps 500 Ju-52s available in the entire southern Soviet Union. They're scattered across multiple bases, many lacking cold weather equipment.
Pilots are not trained for winter operations. Ground crews lack tools to work in extreme cold.
The nearest usable airfields are 200 kilometers from Stalingrad, a 400-kilometer round trip through winter weather and Soviet fighter patrols.
Inside the pocket, there's one operational airfield, Potomnik.
It has a single runway, no heated hangars, minimal fuel storage, and limited anti-aircraft defenses. Soviet forces now surround it with artillery within range.
The first supply flights begin November 25.
That day, 22 Ju-52s reach Potomnik, delivering 55 tons, less than 8% of requirements. Over the next week, flights average 80 to 100 tons per day.
It's nowhere near enough.
Inside the pocket, food rations are immediately cut to half, then quarter.
Ammunition is reserved for defensive emergencies only.
Fuel is rationed drop by drop. And the weather, which had been merely cold, turns vicious. By early December, temperatures drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius.
Blizzards ground flights for days at a time.
Aircraft that do fly often can't find the airfield through snow and darkness.
Many crash attempting to land.
Others are shot down by Soviet fighters or anti-aircraft fire.
Lieutenant Hoffman's diary entries from December chronicle the slow starvation of an army. December 1st, rations cut again. Each man receives 200 grams of bread and thin soup daily. That's all. The soup is mostly water. Men are already weakening.
December 8th, aircraft arrived today with supplies. But there were only a few planes, and what they brought, mostly ammunition, was divided among 300,000 men.
It's a joke. A cruel joke.
We need food, and they send us bullets.
December 14th, the cold is worse than hunger. We have no wood left to burn.
Yesterday we tore apart 2 empty supply crates from an aircraft to fuel a small fire that lasted maybe an hour.
Frostbite cases exceed combat casualties.
The field hospital has no medicine, no bandages, no heat. Wounded men freeze to death on the operating tables. December 20th, a horse died today, starvation and cold.
Within minutes, soldiers descended on the carcass like wolves. There was nothing left within an hour.
Not meat, not bones, not hide.
Everything was taken. Officers did not intervene. We're all starving. The Luftwaffe is trying.
Pilots fly in impossible conditions, taking losses that would ground any normal operation. Between November 24th and December 31st, the Luftwaffe loses 266 aircraft trying to supply the pocket, Ju-52s, He-111s, even 4-engine FW-200 Condors pressed into transport service.
Hundreds of aircrew perish.
But despite heroic efforts, they deliver an average of only 100 tons per day, 1/7 of minimum requirements. The Sixth Army is dying by degrees. And outside the pocket, the promised relief offensive keeps being delayed.
On December 12, hope briefly flares. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, Germany's most skilled commander, launches Operation Winterstorm, a relief offensive aimed at breaking through to the pocket.
General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, reinforced with the 6th and 23rd Panzer Divisions, drives northeast toward Stalingrad from positions 120 kilometers away. The plan: break through Soviet lines, establish a supply corridor to the pocket, then either reinforce the 6th Army to hold Stalingrad or cover their withdrawal. For a week, Winterstorm makes progress.
By December 19, Hoth's spearheads are within 48 kilometers of the pocket's perimeter.
Inside the Kessel, Paulus's troops can hear the distant rumble of Hoth's artillery.
Preparations begin for a breakout to meet the relief force Operation Thunderclap.
But it requires a decision from Hitler. Paulus radios, 4th Panzer Army within striking distance.
Request authorization to break out and link up. The response from Hitler's headquarters is the same as before: 6th Army will hold present positions. Relief force will reach you. Do not attempt breakout.
Manstein, outside the pocket, pleads directly with Hitler: the 6th Army must break out now while relief force is close.
If they remain in the pocket, they will be destroyed. Hitler refuses. By December 23, Soviet reserves counterattack Hoth's forces.
Under pressure from fresh Soviet armies, the relief offensive stalls, then retreats. By December 27, 4th Panzer Army is back where it started, having suffered heavy casualties.
The relief attempt has failed.
Inside the pocket, hope dies.
Lieutenant Hoffman writes, December 24, Christmas Eve, we heard they were coming to save us. Now we hear they've been driven back. We are alone. Merry Christmas.
After the relief failure, conditions in the pocket deteriorate rapidly. By early January 1943, Soviet forces have tightened the ring and captured Potomnik Airfield, the main supply landing point.
Only one smaller airfield remains, Gumrak.
Supply flights drop to fewer than 50 tons per day. Rations are cut to 100 grams of bread a slice per man per day.
Horses are slaughtered and eaten. Then cats, dogs, rats. Anything organic. Dysentery becomes epidemic. Typhus appears. Men are too weak to fight effectively.
Divisions that numbered 12,000 men in November are down to 3,000, most barely able to stand. Wounded receive no treatment, there are no medical supplies, no anesthesia, no bandages. The field hospitals become death houses where men lie in frozen darkness waiting for the end.
Amputations are performed with hacksaws, without anesthetic. Survival rate, nearly zero. Lieutenant Hoffman's diary, January 8, 1943, I no longer write every day. I lack the strength.
Yesterday, 14 men in my company died. Not from combat, from starvation and cold.
We wrapped them in blankets and laid them outside. There's no longer strength to bury them. The ground is frozen anyway. January 15, Gumrak Airfield lost. No more supply flights. We have perhaps 3 days of ammunition left, no food at all.
Orders are still to hold our positions.
Hold against what?
We can barely stand. On January 10, the Soviets launch Operation Ring, the final offensive to crush the pocket. Fresh Soviet armies attack from all sides. The pocket, which was 30 by 25 kilometers, shrinks day by day.
By January 25, it's cut in two.
By January 31, the southern pocket around central Stalingrad is reduced to a few city blocks. On January 30, 1943, Hitler promotes General Paulus to Field Marshal. The message arrives by radio, the only remaining communication link.
It's a calculated gesture. No German field marshal has ever surrendered. Hitler is signaling that Paulus should fight to the death or take his own life rather than capitulate. Paulus understands the message. But he's past caring about symbolism.
His army, the Sixth Army, which entered Stalingrad with 270,000 men, has been reduced to perhaps 90,000 survivors, most too weak to fight. They hold a few ruined buildings in the center of the city. They have no ammunition, no food, no hope. That evening, Paulus discusses options with his remaining staff. General Schmidt still argues for fighting to the last man. It's what Hitler expects. But Paulus has seen enough. Enough men have died following impossible orders, he says quietly. I will not order more to die for nothing. On January 31st, Soviet forces surround Paulus's command bunker in the basement of the Univermag department store. At 0745 hours, Soviet officers enter under a white flag and offer terms, surrender, and surviving soldiers will be treated according to Geneva Convention, resist further, and all will be killed. Paulus surrenders. He becomes the first German field marshal to surrender in the field. His stated reason, I will not shoot myself for that Bohemian corporal, referring to Hitler. Over February 1st and 2nd, the remaining pockets of resistance collapse. Small groups of soldiers, cut off and surrounded, surrender or are overrun. By February 2, 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad is over. Of the 290,000 German and Axis troops trapped in the pocket, approximately 91,000 survived to surrender. Of these, only 6,000 will ever see Germany again, the rest will perish in Soviet POW camps over the following years. Lieutenant Wilhelm Hoffmann's diary ends on January 26, 1943. His final entry reads, "The Russians are 100 meters from our position. We have no ammunition left. Men are lying in the rubble, too weak to move. I don't know if I'll survive the next few hours. If someone finds this diary, please send it to my wife in Bavaria. Tell her I thought of her and our children until the end. Tell her this was not necessary, none of this was necessary. We could have saved ourselves in November, but we were ordered to stay and die. I don't blame the men around me. I don't even blame Paulus. I blame the telegram that ordered us to stand fast, and the man who sent it." Hoffmann was among those who survived to surrender. He was transported to a Soviet POW camp near Voronezh. He died there of typhus in August 1943. His diary was found on his body and eventually made its way to Soviet archives, where it was discovered decades later. He was 29 years old. The casualty figures from Stalingrad are almost incomprehensible. Germany and its allies lost approximately 750,000 men in the larger Battle of Stalingrad, not just those trapped in the pocket, but also the relief attempts and defensive battles. The Sixth Army itself, 290,000 encircled, 91,000 surrendered, only 6,000 survived Soviet captivity to return home. The airlift cost the Luftwaffe 488 aircraft and over 1,000 aircrew. Soviet casualties were even higher, over 1.1 million killed, wounded, or captured. Stalingrad remains the bloodiest battle in human history. And it all stemmed from a telegram sent November 24, 1942, ordering men to stand fast when military reality demanded withdrawal. The question that has haunted military historians for 80 years: what if Hitler had authorized breakout in November? Military analysis suggests that if the Sixth Army had begun breaking out on November 23 or 24, immediately after encirclement, they would have faced Soviet forces still disorganized from their offensive operations, not yet established in strong blocking positions. The breakout would have been costly. Perhaps 50,000 casualties.
Heavy equipment would have been abandoned. But the army would have survived as a fighting force.
Some 200,000 to 250,000 men would have escaped.
They could have been rebuilt, re-equipped, and returned to combat. Instead, by standing fast, the Sixth Army was completely destroyed.
Every soldier was either killed or captured.
The entire force was lost.
Moreover, the resources spent on the failed relief operations Winter Storm, which cost another 40,000 casualties, could have been used more effectively elsewhere.
But Hitler's reasoning wasn't purely military. He believed that holding Stalingrad had propaganda value that outweighed military cost. He believed that German will could overcome material disadvantage. And critically, he believed that losing territory, any territory, represented personal failure. These beliefs cost 300,000 lives. After Stalingrad, Germany never recovered strategic initiative in the East. The myth of Wehrmacht invincibility was shattered permanently. Soviet forces went on the offensive and never stopped until they reached Berlin. But the tragedy is that the soldiers who died at Stalingrad, German and Soviet alike, paid the price for decisions made far from the battlefield, often by men who never understood the reality those soldiers faced. General Friedrich Paulus survived Soviet captivity. He was held in comfortable conditions. The Soviets treated captured generals well, hoping to use them for propaganda. In 1944, Paulus agreed to speak out against Hitler, calling on German forces to surrender. After the war, he remained in Soviet-controlled East Germany, where he died in 1957 at age 66. He never returned to West Germany, never faced trial for following Hitler's orders. His chief of staff, General Arthur Schmidt, who argued most strongly for holding Stalingrad to the last man, survived captivity and returned to Germany in 1955. He never expressed regret. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, who commanded the failed relief operation, continued commanding on the Eastern Front until March 1944, when Hitler dismissed him for advocating strategic withdrawals. He survived the war, was tried at Nuremberg for war crimes related to anti-partisan operations, served 4 years in prison, and was released in 1953. He wrote influential memoirs defending his military decisions. Hermann Göring, who promised aerial resupply and enabled Hitler's stand-fast decision, never acknowledged his responsibility for the Stalingrad disaster. He remained Hitler's designated successor until the final days of the war. He was captured by Americans, tried at Nuremberg, sentenced to death, and took his own life before execution in October 1946. Adolf Hitler reacted to the Stalingrad defeat with rage at his generals, then imposed 3 days of national mourning in Germany. He blamed the army's failure on lack of will, not his own decisions. The pattern established at Stalingrad, forbidding withdrawals, demanding last stands, blaming commanders for defeats caused by his orders, would repeat throughout the rest of the war, costing hundreds of thousands more lives. Of the 91,000 German and Axis soldiers who surrendered at Stalingrad, only 6,000 ever returned home. The rest perished in Soviet POW camps between 1943 and 1955. This wasn't necessarily intentional extermination. Soviet POW camps were brutal for all prisoners, including their own soldiers accused of cowardice or collaboration. But the men who surrendered at Stalingrad were already on the edge of death from starvation and disease. The forced marches to camps, the continued inadequate rations, the hard labor, the lack of medical care, few could survive it. Many died within weeks of surrender.
Prisoners were used for forced labor rebuilding Soviet infrastructure destroyed by the war, working in mines and factories, clearing rubble in Stalingrad itself. The work was hard, rations minimal, shelter inadequate. Dysentery, typhus, and tuberculosis killed thousands. Others died from continuing effects of frostbite and malnutrition suffered during the siege. The last German POWs from Stalingrad weren't released until 1955, under agreements between West Germany and the Soviet Union. These final survivors, about 2,000 men, returned to a Germany they barely recognized, divided, occupied, rebuilt. Many found their families had given them up for dead years before. Some found their wives had remarried, their children didn't recognize them. They were in their 40s and 50s but looked 70, broken men who'd survived hell twice, first the Kessel, then Soviet captivity. Their stories were often not welcomed in post-war Germany, where people wanted to forget the war, not remember its horrors. But their testimony, those who could bear to speak of it, provides the most powerful evidence of what Hitler's telegram cost. Today, Volgograd, renamed from Stalingrad in 1961, is a modern Russian city of 1 million people. But the battle is everywhere. The Mamayev Kurgan Memorial Complex dominates the city, a massive monument featuring the Motherland Calls statue, a 85-meter-tall figure of a woman with a raised sword, visible for miles. It stands on the hill that was the most contested point during the battle. The memorial walls list the names of 35,000 defenders. There are no German memorials in the city. Russian law prohibits them. But in the military cemetery at Rasashka, 40 kilometers northwest, there's a German war cemetery established in the 1990s. Simple dark stone markers bear the names of 120,000 German soldiers who fell in the Greater Stalingrad battle, only a fraction of the total, most of whom remain unidentified. Families still make pilgrimages there, seeking closure for losses 80 years past. In Pitomnik, where the airlift struggled and failed, there's nothing, just empty steppe. Gumrak Airfield is overgrown. The Univermag department store where Paulus surrendered was rebuilt and is now a shopping center, with a small museum in the basement showing the surrender room. Walking through modern Volgograd, knowing that almost every building stands on ground where thousands died, where an entire army starved and froze because of a telegram, creates a powerful sense of the weight of history. Veterans, the last few survivors from both sides, have occasionally met there in recent years. These meetings are always emotional. The men are in their 90s or 100s now. They don't talk about ideology or politics. They talk about cold and hunger and fear. They talk about friends who didn't survive. And they invariably say the same thing: it should never happen again. The telegram that trapped 300,000 German soldiers at Stalingrad was 89 words long. It took perhaps 5 minutes to type. Hitler sent it without visiting the front, without consulting his field commanders about its feasibility, without understanding the logistics of aerial resupply or the mathematics of survival. It was based on Göring's promise, a promise made to please Hitler rather than reflect reality. That 89-word message caused more military casualties than some entire wars. It destroyed Germany's finest army. It marked the turning point of World War II in Europe. And it taught a lesson that military academies study to this day, that disconnecting strategy from reality, that valuing ideology over logistics, that centralizing all decisions in one person far from the battlefield, costs lives, not in the abstract, but specifically, personally, individually. The soldiers at Stalingrad didn't die for strategy.
They died because one man refused to authorize a withdrawal that every professional officer knew was necessary. They died because orders from 1,500 miles away overruled reality on the ground. They died because a telegram valued prestige over survival. Wilhelm Hoffmann was 28 years old when he died in a Soviet POW camp. He had a wife and 2 children he never saw again. He was a schoolteacher who wanted to go home. He died because of 89 words sent on November 24, 1942, ordering him to stand fast. Stories like this deserve to be remembered, not to assign blame to nations or peoples, but to understand what happens when leadership failures meet human beings. The telegram that trapped 300,000 soldiers is preserved in archives. Those 89 words outlived every person they killed. That's why we must remember, so that orders like that are questioned, resisted, refused, so that 89 words never again have the power to destroy 300,000 lives.